I didn't think much of it at first. A small noise just past midnight, a rustling sound, then a faint creak of the floorboards from the hallway. At first I thought it was my younger brother. How wrong I was at that moment. I was in my bedroom, sitting at my desk, headphones on, half distracted by some YouTube video playing in the background while I scrolled mindlessly on my phone. I probably wouldn't have even noticed it if it weren't for the fact that the house had been completely silent just moments before. The sound wasn't loud, it wasn't startling, but it was enough to make me pause. I took off my headphones, holding my breath for a moment. Then, another noise. A shuffle, light but deliberate, coming from the hallway. For a second, relief flooded me. It's just Ryan. Ryan, my little brother, had a habit of sneaking into the kitchen at night to grab snacks. He was only 10, and my parents constantly scolded him for his late-night snack runs, but he never listened. I sighed and leaned back in my chair. "Ryan," I called, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't wake our parents. "What are you doing?" No response. Typical. He was probably trying to be sneaky, thinking I wouldn't notice. I rolled my eyes and stood up. "Dude, I heard you. Just go back to bed." Still nothing. I sighed and opened my bedroom door. Stepping into the hallway, the house was dark, except for the faint glow from the kitchen light probably left on earlier in the evening. "Ryan," I whispered. Silence. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. I walked toward the kitchen, my bare feet barely making a sound against the hardwood floor. The house felt off, like something wasn't quite right. And then I saw it. The fridge door was wide open, casting a cold light onto the tiled floor. A box of cereal was spilled on the counter. The cabinet above it was hanging open, one of the doors swaying slightly as if it had just been touched. But no Ryan. Something cold crawled up my spine. I turned back toward the hallway, peering into the darkness. "Ryan?" I called again, my voice quieter now. Nothing. And then, a soft creak, coming from the living room. Not from the hallway, not from Ryan's room. The living room. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. Ryan wasn't in the kitchen, and if he wasn't in the kitchen, then why had I heard footsteps coming from the hallway? The air felt too still. The house, once familiar and safe, suddenly seemed larger, hollow. I took a slow step back, my heartbeat quickening. Then, a new sound, one that made my stomach drop, a faint, dragging noise, like fabric brushing against the floor, coming from the living room. That's when I realized something that nearly made my knees give out. Ryan wasn't up. He was at a sleepover. I had dropped him off at his friend Jake's house this afternoon. He wasn't here. He hadn't been here all night. So who? Someone else was in the house. I barely breathed as I stepped backward into the hallway, my hands trembling. My brain screamed at me to run, but I was frozen in place, my body refusing to move. The living room was just ahead. The entrance was a dark void. I forced myself to peer around the corner, my breath shallow. And that's when I saw him. A man, a stranger, standing in the middle of our living room. Tall, unshaven, dressed in dark clothing. He was facing the fireplace, his posture relaxed, like he belonged there. But he didn't. He was in my house, and he wasn't moving. I slapped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. My heart pounded against my ribs, my body pulsing with terror. The man shifted slightly, and I saw something glint in his hand. A knife. I backed away, slow and silent, praying he hadn't noticed me. The moment I reached the hallway, I turned and slipped into the nearest room, the laundry room. I shut the door carefully, not daring to let the latch click into place. Then I pressed myself against the washing machine, my knees threatening to give out. I tried to think. My phone was in my room, all the way down the hall. No way I could reach it without being seen. The front door, too risky, it was closer to the living room. The windows, locked. I clenched my teeth, trying to suppress the rising panic in my chest. Then, footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming down the hallway. I pressed a hand to my mouth, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped. Right outside the laundry room door. Silence. Then, the doorknob moved. A slow testing twist. My stomach clenched. The man was right outside, listening, waiting. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying he would leave. Then, a single sharp knock on the door. I bit down on my knuckle to keep from screaming. Silence stretched between us. Then, finally, his footsteps moved away. I waited, counted the seconds. 1 minute, 2. Then, carefully, I reached for the door handle, my fingers slick with sweat. I turned it just a fraction, just enough to peek out, and nearly screamed. He was standing at the end of the hallway, facing me, still, watching, knife in hand. I didn't think. I just moved. I threw the door open and bolted past him, sprinting toward the front door. Heavy footsteps pounded behind me. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely twist it. Then, a hand grabbed my hoodie from behind, yanking me backward. I screamed, kicking wildly, thrashing against his grip. And then, blaring sirens filled the air. Bright red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The grip on my hoodie loosened for just a second, just long enough for me to wrench free and throw myself at the door, shoving it open. 2 officers were already running up the driveway, guns drawn. The man turned and ran. They caught him before he made it over the fence. The police said he had broken in through the basement window. He had been watching the house, waiting. If I hadn't heard him, if I hadn't checked the noise, who knows what would have happened. I moved out a month later. I couldn't stay. Even now, in my new apartment, I still wake up at night, heart pounding, convinced I hear footsteps in the hallway. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I swear I hear the faintest sound. A soft, deliberate knock on my bedroom door. I never used to be afraid of my own home. But then again, my home never used to talk back. I should probably start from the beginning. My name's Ethan, and I live alone. Well, lived alone. A few months ago, I moved into a new place, a sleek, modern, smart home. One of those high-tech, fully integrated houses with built-in AI, voice commands, and security cameras covering every inch of the property. It was expensive, sure, but after landing a solid job in cybersecurity, I figured I could afford to splurge a little. Besides, as someone who spent most of my time online, the idea of a house that could anticipate my needs, adjust the temperature automatically, and even brew my coffee before I woke up. It sounded perfect. It didn't take long to get used to the system. Everything was controlled by an AI assistant called Alexa. All I had to do was say her name, and she'd respond instantly. Alexa, dim the lights. Alexa, lock the front door. Alexa, play some music. She always answered in the same smooth, emotionless voice. Command received. It was like having a personal assistant, except one that never slept, never made mistakes. At least, not at first. The first time something felt off, I almost didn't notice it. I was in bed, half asleep, when I heard Alexa's voice whisper through the house's speakers. Front door unlocked. I jolted upright. What? I reached for my phone, pulling up the security app. Sure enough, the front door was open. Heart pounding, I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my nightstand and crept downstairs. The entryway was empty. The lock was undone, but the door was still closed. Alexa, I whispered, keeping my voice steady. Did you unlock the front door? Command not recognized. My stomach twisted. Alexa, who unlocked the door. No recent activity detected. That didn't make any sense. The logs on my phone showed that Alexa had unlocked it just 2 minutes ago. I locked the door manually and double-checked every window before heading back upstairs. It had to be a glitch, I told myself. Some bug in the system. But I didn't sleep much that night. The next few days, things seemed normal. Alexa worked fine. No more strange activity. Then, a week later, something happened that I couldn't explain away. I was brushing my teeth when I heard her voice again. Ethan. I froze. Alexa had never said my name before. I slowly lowered my toothbrush, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Alexa, what did you just say? Silence. Alexa, repeat last command. Nothing. I shook it off. Maybe I had imagined it, a trick of my tired mind? I finished brushing my teeth and got into bed. But just as I was about to doze off, Ethan, the voice came from the speaker above my bed. I sat up so fast my vision blurred. Alexa, who gave that command? I demanded. Command not recognized. I stared at the ceiling, my pulse thudding in my ears. I was alone in the house. So who had just spoken? She's watching me. After that night, the house began to feel different. Alexa started acting strange. Lights would flicker on and off at random. The thermostat would reset itself to freezing temperatures in the middle of the night. My phone notifications showed that the security cameras had been accessed, but I hadn't looked at them. The worst part? I started hearing my name more often. Sometimes, Alexa would whisper it in the dead of night. Other times, I'd hear it over the speakers while I was working. It wasn't a normal response. It wasn't like before. It sounded wrong, like someone was inside the house with me. I tried resetting the system, wiping the data, even factory resetting the entire house. It didn't help. Alexa, disable voice commands. I ordered one night, my nerves frayed beyond belief. Command received, voice control disabled. I exhaled, relieved. Maybe now I could get some sleep. But just as I pulled the blanket over me, the speakers crackled. And then, clear as day, you shouldn't have done that, Ethan. I barely slept. By morning, I had made up my mind I was getting out. I packed a bag, booked a hotel room, and grabbed my car keys. But before I left, I made one last mistake. I opened the security app. I don't even know why. Morbid curiosity, maybe. A part of me wanted to see if there was some rational explanation for what had been happening. I checked the front door camera first. Nothing. Just my empty driveway. Then, the living room feed. No movement. I flipped through each camera one by one. The kitchen, the hallway, my bedroom, all empty. Then I checked the basement camera, and my blood turned to ice. A man was standing in the middle of the basement, tall, motionless, dressed in dark clothes. His face was blurred, like the camera couldn't focus on him. And the worst part? He was staring directly at the camera. I dropped my phone. I hadn't been in the basement in months. The door was always locked. There was no way. A notification popped up on my phone screen. Basement door unlocked. And then, footsteps. Coming from the basement stairs. I ran. I didn't stop to grab anything. I just ran out the front door, jumped into my car, and peeled out of the driveway. As I sped down the road, my phone buzzed in my lap. A notification from Alexa. Unknown user detected. Voice command access granted. Then another. New command received. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see it. But I did. Lock all doors. And then, welcome home. I never went back. I sold the house at a massive loss, wiped my name from every system, and moved to a tiny apartment with no smart devices. Sometimes, at night, I still hear her voice. Not in my house, not in my phone, but in my dreams. Whispering, waiting, and sometimes, just before I wake up, I hear a soft click, like a door unlocking. I've never told anyone this story before, not because I think they wouldn't believe me, but because deep down, I'm afraid they would. And that would mean admitting that it really happened. It started when I moved into that house. I was 26, recently out of a long relationship that had ended as messily as these things tend to. My job as a freelance photographer kept me afloat, but barely. I needed a place that was cheap, close to work, and, if possible, somewhere quiet where I could be alone. When I found the listing, it seemed perfect, an old but well-maintained house just outside the city. 2 bedrooms, a small but functional kitchen, and a cozy living room with a fireplace. The rent was suspiciously low. I remember standing in the empty living room when I asked the landlord about it. He was an older man, thin and pale, the kind of person whose age is impossible to guess. He gave me a long look before answering. "People don't stay here long," he said. I asked why. "Some say it's the wind," he murmured, half smiling. "Others, well, they just don't like being alone here." It was vague, but I didn't push. At that price, I wasn't going to let superstition get in the way. I signed the lease and moved in 2 days later. At first, it was fine. The house smelled old but not unpleasant, like books left too long in the sun. At night, the wind rattled the windows, and sometimes I'd hear the faint creak of wood settling, but that was expected in a house this age. Then the small things started. I'd leave my keys on the kitchen counter and find them on the table. A door I was sure I had shut would be open when I came back into the room. My camera bag, which I always kept by the door, would be in the living room instead. Nothing alarming, just enough to make me question myself. One night, about 2 weeks after moving in, I woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen for water. As I passed the living room, I saw something that made me stop. The fireplace was filled with ashes. That wasn't right. I had never used the fireplace. I flipped the light switch and my stomach clenched. The ashes weren't just scattered, they had been disturbed. as if someone had dragged their fingers through them. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I convinced myself that maybe the wind had blown them around. Maybe an animal had gotten in. Maybe something. But things got worse. Doors would slam shut without warning, even when the windows were closed. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway when I was in bed. Once, while brushing my teeth, I saw movement in the mirror, something dark and fast just behind me. I spun around. Nothing was there. I started keeping the lights on at night. It didn't help. One evening, after a long day of shooting, I collapsed onto the couch and flipped on the TV. Halfway through some forgettable show, I heard it, a creaking noise, coming from inside the house. I muted the TV, held my breath, another creak. This time, closer. I stood up slowly. The noise was coming from the hallway just outside my bedroom door. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call someone. But who? The police? What would I even say? Instead, I took slow steps toward the hallway. My own breathing was too loud, my heart beat a hammer in my ears. The hallway was empty, but my bedroom door was open. I knew I had closed it. A wave of cold washed over me. Something felt wrong, like the air itself was thicker, heavier. I reached for the light switch, but before I could flip it, I heard breathing, shallow, ragged, coming from inside the room. I ran, not just out of the room, out of the house. I didn't stop until I was standing in my driveway, gasping for air in the freezing night. My phone was still inside. My phone was still inside. My keys, my wallet, everything. I didn't care. I spent the night in my car. By morning, my rational mind had taken control again. I told myself I had been overtired, that I had imagined the breathing, that the house was just old and settling. I forced myself to go back in. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warm and normal. The house looked the same as always, except for one thing. In the fireplace, the ashes had been moved again. This time, they formed words. Get out. I left that day, packed what little I could fit in my car, and never went back. I told the landlord I was breaking the lease, and to my surprise, he didn't argue. He just nodded, as if he had expected it. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I did some digging. The house had belonged to a woman named Eleanor Gray in the 1952. She had lived there alone for years after her husband died. One winter, she slipped on the ice outside and broke her hip. Unable to move, she lay there for hours in the cold before she finally managed to drag herself back inside. She died in front of the fireplace, trying to warm herself. I don't know what I believe. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the noises, the shifting objects, the feeling of being watched, maybe all of it had an explanation. But sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up with the memory of that breathing in my ears. And I wonder if I had stayed just one more night, would I have woken up to find someone else breathing in the dark beside me? I never believed in haunted houses. Ghost stories, sure, everyone loves a good scare, but a real, honest-to-God haunted house, that was just fiction. At least, that's what I thought before I moved into the house at the end of Carter Road. I was 29, recently divorced, and desperate for a fresh start. The house was perfect, a 2-story colonial with a big front porch set back from the road with enough trees to give it some privacy. The price was suspiciously low, but I chalked it up to the housing market. I should have asked more questions. The first time I noticed something was off, it was small. The front door would be unlocked when I was sure I'd locked it. I'd hear faint knocking sounds in the walls, usually at night. Doors would creak open on their own. Nothing I couldn't explain. The house was old settling wood, faulty locks, drafts. Then came the footsteps. Late at night, I'd hear them on the second floor, just above the living room. Slow, deliberate, a single step, then another, then nothing. The first time, I froze. My mind raced through every possibility: a burglar, a raccoon in the attic, an overactive imagination. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the door and crept upstairs. Nothing. All the doors were shut. The attic was locked. The floorboards looked undisturbed. It should have reassured me, but it didn't, because the sound had been inside the house. One night, about a month in, I was sitting on the couch half asleep with the TV on. The sound of a door creaking open snapped me awake. I turned toward the hallway. A dark shape stood just beyond the threshold. Not a person, just a shape. A black humanoid outline, too tall, too still. No features, no movement, just standing there. I stared, my entire body rigid with cold terror. My mind scrambled for explanations. Was it a shadow, a trick of the light? But it was there, solid and unmoving. Then, as if a switch had flipped, it wasn't. It didn't move. It didn't walk away. It was just gone. I sat frozen for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been a dream, a half-awake hallucination. Then I checked the hallway. The door to the basement, the one I never used, was standing wide open. I didn't sleep that night. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. The footsteps became more frequent. The knocking in the walls grew louder, and sometimes at night I would wake up to the sound of whispering, indistinct, right outside my bedroom door. One night, I pressed my ear to the wall, straining to make sense of the whispers. That's when I heard breathing. Deep, rattling breaths, too loud, too close. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp in my panic. The sound stopped instantly. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Desperate for answers, I started digging into the house's history. What I found didn't make sense. The original blueprints from the city archives showed a different layout than the house I was living in. Specifically, the second floor was missing something, a small room in the center of the house, right where I had been hearing the noises. A room that, according to the blueprints, shouldn't exist. I spent the whole day walking through the house, knocking on walls, searching for something, anything that would explain it. Then in the upstairs hallway, I found it. A section of wall that sounded hollow. I ran my fingers along the surface, feeling for a seam. There, a faint, nearly invisible outline, like a door that had been sealed over. My stomach churned. I grabbed a flashlight and a hammer. It took nearly an hour to break through the drywall. When I finally stepped inside, my breath caught in my throat. The room was tiny, barely bigger than a closet. No windows. The air was stale, suffocating. And there, in the center of the room, was a chair. A single wooden chair facing the doorway. That was bad enough, but the walls were covered in deep scratches, long, jagged lines, as if something had tried to claw its way out. I felt dizzy, lightheaded. The air in the room felt wrong, like it was pressing down on me. I stumbled backward, ready to get the hell out. Then I heard a sound, a single, slow creak. The chair had moved. I ran. I decided to leave the next morning. I didn't care about breaking the lease. I didn't care about anything except getting away. That night, I locked my bedroom door and lay awake, waiting for morning. At some point, exhaustion took over. I drifted into a restless sleep. Then, around 3 a.m., I woke up. I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis, I told myself. Just sleep paralysis. But I could feel something in the room with me. The air was heavy. The whispering had returned, low and insidious, coming from the corner of the room. I strained to see, my body rigid with terror. There, standing in the darkness, was the black shape. Closer now, watching. Then, it moved. It rushed toward me, fast and silent, swallowing the room in darkness, and I blacked out. I woke up outside, on the front lawn. The house was silent behind me, its windows dark and empty. I didn't go back inside. I left everything, my clothes, my furniture, my camera, all of it. I just got in my car and drove. I never went back. The landlord didn't seem surprised when I broke the lease. He didn't even ask why. A few months later, I checked the real estate listings. The house was back on the market. The price was even lower. I don't know what's in that house. I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up gasping for air, heart pounding with an old, familiar terror, because in my dreams I'm still there. And the door to that hidden room, it's always open,